The following content examines a real criminal case involving violence and loss of life. Out of respect for the victims and their families, viewer discretion is strongly advised.
Well, a Deer Park man suspected of killing his ex-wife broke into her home while she was taking their kids to school and attacked her when she returned.
Detectives say Chanin Starbuck was ambushed in her bedroom and even managed to briefly dial 911 before she was strangled to death. This afternoon,
a view of the victim's midsection, showing the massager laying on her abdomen, her hands covered over it.
The Starbuck children think the way their mom's remains were violated is a sign she was killed by a sexual deviant she had met through online dating.
A 911 call, 9 seconds long, then silence. 2 days later, deputies would force their way into a modest rental home on North Riper Street. What they found in the master bedroom would become one of Washington State's most controversial murder cases. 42-year-old Chanin Starbuck, mother of 5, found deceased. Her body had been carefully staged. Items were arranged around her in a disturbing manner. She had been strangled, tossed, and violated after her death. This wasn't just murder. This was a message. Within weeks, detectives arrested her ex-husband, Clay Starbuck. The evidence seemed overwhelming. His DNA on her body, motive dripping with jealousy and rage, an alibi full of holes. In 2013, a jury convicted him. Life in prison, no parole. Case closed. But here's the twist. His 5 children, including the victim's own children, don't believe he did it. And the DNA evidence? It tells a story investigators never wanted to hear. 3 unidentified male DNA profiles at the crime scene. Critical evidence never tested. And a 911 call that might prove someone else was in that house. This is the story of Chanin Starbuck. And the question that haunts everyone who knows it: did they convict the wrong man? Welcome to True Crime Mind Studio. What you're about to witness is a case that shattered a family twice. First by murder, then by a conviction that divides them to this day. A story where DNA evidence raises more questions than answers, and justice itself hangs in the balance. If you're ready to dive deep into cases that challenge everything, hit that subscribe button, smash the like, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Now, let's get into it. Chanin Denise Starbuck was born in Indiana and raised in Florida. She was artistic, earning an associate degree in art therapy. By all accounts, she was a devoted mother who was rebuilding her life. Chanin had recently completed a dental assistant program and was starting fresh after a difficult divorce. She had 5 children to care for, 3 of whom lived with her full-time. But Chanin's path to this moment had been anything but simple. In 1990, Chanin married Clay Starbuck. The marriage ended in divorce 10 years later in 2000. During their separation, Chanin became pregnant by another man, a child she named Marshall. When Chanin and Clay reconciled and remarried in 2006, Clay embraced Marshall as his own. But the second marriage didn't last. By July 2011, Chanin and Clay were divorced again. The split was bitter. There were disputes over money, custody, and lifestyle choices. Clay owed thousands in monthly child support, and according to court documents, he was obsessed with Chanin's life after their divorce. After the divorce, Chanin began dating again, using online dating sites to meet new people. She was communicating with several men, trying to move forward with her life. But someone was watching. Someone who knew every message she sent, every person she talked to, every plan she made. Someone who had installed spyware on her computer. Someone who was tracking her every move. On the morning of December 1st, 2011, that someone made their move. And by the time police arrived 2 days later, it was already too late. December 2nd, 2011. Chanin's family, concerned they hadn't heard from her, contacted the Spokane County Sheriff's Office and requested a welfare check. But here's the thing, someone had already been there. Someone who didn't want Chanin found. Not yet. Deputies arrived at 509 North Riper Street in Deer Park. They walked around the property, looking for signs of forced entry or anything suspicious. Finding nothing obvious, they made a decision that would later be scrutinized. They left without entering the home. The next day, December 3rd, another call came in. This time, a friend reported that Shannon hadn't been heard from in several days. Highly unusual behavior for a mother who stayed in constant contact with her children. Deputies returned. This time, they went inside, down the hallway, past the living room where family photos still hung on the walls, into the master bedroom where what they found in the master bedroom was a carefully staged scene. Shannon's body lay on the bed, positioned in a sexually explicit manner. Items had been placed around her, arranged as if on display. She had been strangled, tossed, and violated after death. Detective Lyle Johnston was one of the first investigators on scene. He would later testify that the home appeared normal. There was no sign of a struggle, no forced entry. But in the bedroom, a violent crime had taken place. One that had lasted for hours. The autopsy revealed the horrific details. Shannon had suffered between 80 to 90 wounds, 11 broken ribs, bruises from head to toe, bleeding under her scalp. The medical examiner determined that strangulation had caused her death, a process that would have taken between 30 minutes to 2 hours. Whoever did this wanted her to suffer. This was not a crime of passion. This was deliberate, calculated, and filled with rage. On a dresser next to the bed, detectives found Shannon's journal, filled with entries describing her difficulties with her ex-husband, Clay Starbuck. But buried in those pages was something else. Something that would later be excluded from trial. Names, dates, accusations, and one chilling line written just days before her death. He's watching me. He knows things he shouldn't know. Within hours of discovering the body, detectives had a prime suspect. But what they didn't know, he'd been planning his defense for months. From the beginning, Clay Starbuck was a person of interest. He had motive. He had opportunity. And his behavior in the days surrounding Shannon's death raised red flags. But when detectives sat him down for questioning, Clay didn't lawyer up, didn't refuse to talk. In fact, he did something that would either prove his innocence or seal his fate. He told them everything. According to Clay, on the morning of December 1st, he was supposed to pick up the children and take them to school. But his car broke down, so he called Shannon and asked her to take them instead. He claimed he texted her around 8 a.m., then went home and went back to sleep. Clay said he returned to his car around 11 a.m. His phone, he claimed, had run out of charge. When he turned it back on at 3:37 p.m., he saw a text from Shannon sent at 3:17 p.m. asking him to pick up the children from school. But detectives didn't believe him. They found no evidence of a broken-down car, and the timeline didn't add up. At 9:18 a.m. on December 1st, a 911 call was placed from Shannon's cell phone. The call lasted only seconds. There was a brief utterance, then silence. When dispatchers tried to call back 1 minute later, the phone was shut off. It would remain off for more than 2 hours. And here's the critical detail. Clay's phone also went dark around the same time, conveniently turned off or dead approximately 1 hour before that 911 call. Prosecutors would later argue this was no coincidence. They believed Clay had orchestrated the entire thing, luring Shannon out of her home under the pretense of taking the children to school, then breaking in and waiting for her to return. When she came back, he attacked. For hours, he brutalized her. And then, to cover his tracks, he used her phone to send text messages, posing as Shannon to create an alibi. Text messages were sent to Clay himself, to the children, and to the men Shannon had been dating, John Kenline and Shane Walker. The messages appeared normal, as if Shannon was going about her day. But according to prosecutors, Shannon was already dead, and the person sending those messages was her killer. Investigators made another disturbing discovery. On Clay's computer, they found keystroke logging software, a program called Artimax. Clay had been spying on Shannon, tracking her online activities, reading her private messages. Before her death, Shannon had confronted him about it, texting, "You came into my house, stole my rings, among other things, put keylogger on the computer. You are capable of anything." Detectives believed Clay's obsession with Shannon's dating life had driven him to murder. They theorized he had timed the attack to coincide with one of her dates, specifically with John Kenline, who had plans to visit Shannon that morning. hoping to frame one of these men for the crime. The theory was elegant. The motive was clear. The suspect was obvious. There was just one problem. The DNA evidence was about to tell a very different story. One that would either confirm their suspicions or blow the entire case wide open. The case against Clay Starbuck hinged largely on forensic evidence. But the DNA results were far from clear-cut. In fact, what the crime lab found would force everyone involved to ask a disturbing question. What if they'd been looking at the wrong suspect all along? DNA collected from Chanin's fingernails, neck, and face showed a partial match, consistent with either Clay Starbuck or the couple's two oldest sons. The prosecution argued that since both sons had verifiable alibis, one at work, one at school, Clay must have been the source. But the defense pointed out a critical detail. This was a partial match, not a definitive identification. The DNA could have been transferred innocently. After all, Clay and Shannon had been married twice. He had slept in that very bed for years. More problematic for the prosecution. DNA from at least 3 unidentified males was found at the crime scene. An unknown male's DNA was on Shannon's cell phone. Semen from an unidentified male was found on her body. Hair samples collected from the scene were never tested. In fact, a significant amount of evidence was never tested at all. The items found with the body, including objects found inside Shannon and on her body, were never analyzed for DNA. Blood stains found in a second bathroom were never tested. Sheets and a towel that may have been used to strangle the victim were collected but not examined. During the trial, Detective Mike Ricketts admitted he had deliberately limited the forensic testing. He believed he already knew who the suspect was and focused only on evidence that would support that theory. But here's what the jury never heard. When the crime lab recovered Shannon's cell phone, they found DNA from an unidentified male on the device. That phone had been used to send text messages to Clay, to Shannon's children, and to the men she was dating, all after she was likely already dead. The person who sent those messages left their DNA on that phone. And it wasn't Clay Starbuck. Detective Ricketts had a theory about this. He claimed Clay must have worn gloves while texting. But investigators never found any gloves at the scene. Never found any evidence Clay had purchased gloves. The glove theory? Pure speculation. The defense hammered this point repeatedly. If this was truly a thorough investigation, why had so much evidence been ignored? And why was the one piece of DNA evidence that could definitively exclude Clay, the cell phone that sent the alibi texts, being explained away rather than investigated? 3 unidentified male DNA profiles, untested evidence, and a detective who admitted he'd only tested what fit his theory. The defense believed they had reasonable doubt. Mountains of it. But would 12 ordinary citizens see it the same way? Or would they trust the prosecutors who promised them justice? No matter what the DNA said, the answer would come down to one question. In the absence of absolute certainty, who do you believe? In May 2013, Clay Starbuck went on trial for the aggravated first-degree murder of Chanin Starbuck and the sexual violation of human remains. For the next several weeks, a Spokane County jury would hear 2 completely different versions of the same story. 2 narratives. 2 truths. Only one could be right. The trial lasted several weeks. Deputy Prosecutor Larry Steinmetz painted Clay as a jealous, controlling, obsessed man who had finally snapped. He detailed Clay's financial troubles, the thousands in child support he owed, the custody battles, Clay's fixation on Shannon's activities after their divorce. The prosecution's case was built on circumstantial evidence. Clay had the motive, jealousy, and rage over Shannon's new lifestyle. He had the opportunity, no verifiable alibi and suspicious phone activity. And he had the means, access to her home, knowledge of her schedule through the spyware. Defense attorney Derek Reed attacked the investigation itself. He pointed out that Shannon had been in contact with multiple men through online dating, any of whom could have been responsible. He emphasized the unidentified DNA, the untested evidence, the tunnel vision of investigators who, in his words, had decided Clay was guilty from day one. Clay Starbuck took the stand in his own defense. He maintained his innocence. He was cooperative, he said. He had voluntarily given his DNA, handed over his phone, answered every question.
The truth, whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I swear.
Thank you. Please be seated.
Clay Starbuck took the stand today, confidently answering questions from his own defense attorneys. Starbuck wasn't even afraid to admit that he had secretly installed spyware on his wife's computer before their divorce was finalized.
And why did you place the keylogger on that computer?
I was suspicious of online dating activities.
Starbuck was also able to accurately testify that he cooperated with investigators at every turn, voluntarily providing his cell phone, DNA, and fingerprints. Starbuck also declared under oath that he did not kill Shannon.
Mr. Starbuck, did you see Chanin Starbuck on December 1st, 2011?
No.
Mr. Starbuck, did you kill Chanin Starbuck?
No, I did not.
However, under cross-examination, Starbuck couldn't bring himself to answer questions about the way that Shannon was killed and sexually violated after her death. And jurors must have found that unusual, given the graphic descriptions that Starbuck has heard during his trial.
Do you think that Chanin Starbuck's killer was trying to send a message?
I don't know.
Well, can you give us a fair estimation?
I don't know. That would only be assumptions.
Well, let me hear your assumption.
I don't really have one. I haven't given it much thought.
After 2 days of deliberation, the jury reached a verdict. The courtroom was packed. Shannon's extended family sat on one side, demanding justice. Clay's 5 children, Shannon's own children, sat on the other, praying for their father's freedom. Guilty on all counts.
Will spend the rest of his life in prison without the possibility of parole. Last month, the jury convicted Starbuck of killing his ex-wife Shannon and sexually violating her remains.
As the verdict was read, Shannon's family wept with relief. But across the aisle, Clay's children collapsed in disbelief. Blake Starbuck, the oldest son, would later say, "The system failed. They convicted an innocent man." Clay Starbuck was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. But the most heart-wrenching aspect of the verdict? His 5 children, including Shannon's children, stood by their father. They believed and still believe he is innocent. A family destroyed twice, first by murder, then by conviction. Clay Starbuck began serving his life sentence, maintaining his innocence every single day. For most people, this is where the story ends. Guilty verdict, life in prison, justice served. But remember those 3 unidentified male DNA profiles? The untested evidence? The cell phone with someone else's DNA? They were about to become impossible to ignore. Clay Starbuck has never stopped fighting his conviction. In 2015, his appeal was denied by the Washington State Court of Appeals. The court ruled that there was sufficient circumstantial evidence to support the jury's verdict and that the trial court had properly excluded evidence about Shannon's relationships with other men. For 6 years, it seemed like the case was truly closed. But sometimes justice moves slowly, and sometimes it moves in unexpected directions. In 2021, something changed. With help from the Washington Innocence Project, Clay's attorney filed a motion for post-conviction DNA testing. They argued that limited testing had been conducted during the original investigation and that new DNA technology could provide critical information. In June 2021, Spokane County Superior Court Judge Julie McKay granted the motion. For the first time, evidence including hair samples, towels, and previously untested swabs would be analyzed with modern forensic techniques. Blake Starbuck, one of Clay's sons, has been the driving force behind this effort. He told reporters, "There's a lot of unidentified DNA that was found, 3 separate males just on the things that were tested. This is going to be a big turning point. The Starbuck children have lived in limbo for over a decade. They lost their mother to a brutal murder. Their father sits in prison for a crime they believe he didn't commit. And the family has been torn apart by doubt, grief, and unanswered questions." Tragically, the family's suffering didn't end with Shannon's death. In December 2021, exactly 10 years after their mother was murdered, Loghan Starbuck, one of the couple's daughters, went missing. She was last seen on a bus traveling from Cheney to Spokane, Washington. Despite extensive searches, She has not been found. So what really happened on that cold December morning in 2011? Was Clay Starbuck a jealous, vengeful ex-husband who committed the ultimate act of violence? Or was he a convenient target for investigators who failed to thoroughly examine other suspects? The jury has spoken. The appeals have been denied. But the DNA evidence, both tested and untested, continues to raise questions. Questions about guilt, about reasonable doubt, and about whether justice was truly served. And here's something that should haunt everyone involved in this case. Remember those 3 unidentified male DNA profiles found at the crime scene? They're still unidentified, still sitting in an evidence locker somewhere, still waiting to be run through modern databases that didn't exist in 2011. What if one of those profiles matches someone in the system today? What if the real killer's DNA has been there all along, waiting to tell the truth? What we know for certain is this: Chanin Starbuck, a mother, daughter, and friend, lost her life in the most horrific way imaginable. Her children grew up without a mother, and a family was shattered beyond repair. As the new DNA testing moves forward, perhaps someday we'll have definitive answers. Until then, one question remains. Is an innocent man rotting in prison while a killer walks free? Clay Starbuck remains incarcerated at Airway Heights Corrections Center. Post-conviction DNA testing is ongoing as of 2025. The 3 unidentified male DNA profiles remain unidentified. Loghan Starbuck is still missing, but justice isn't always black and white. It's a puzzle of evidence, human judgment, and the weight of reasonable doubt. Chanin Starbuck deserved justice. Her children deserved answers. And if Clay Starbuck is innocent, he deserves his freedom. The truth may still be locked in that untested evidence, in those 3 unidentified DNA profiles, in databases that didn't exist when this investigation began. What happened to Shannon on that cold December morning? We may never know with absolute certainty. But one thing is clear: this story isn't over. Not by a long shot. If you found this case as compelling as we did, we'd love to have you join our community here at True Crime Mind Studio. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss our deep dives into the cases that keep us questioning. We'll be following this story as new developments emerge. Until next time, stay curious, stay critical, and keep seeking the truth.